Guys, welcome to the show. Subscribe, rate, review. We got a great show. You've seen him on News Nation, and he's a News Nation anchor, and you've seen him on Fox. He has a new book out, his memoir called Leland Vittert, Born Lucky. And this memoir is a very special memoir because this is you talking about your autism and your relationship with your father, which I think is very, very important because, Leland, I'm also on the spectrum. And I kind of really like promoting other people on the spectrum because I feel we do great things, and I think that this book is kind of showing how that's possible.
Well, the key, thank you. Good to be with you. Congrats on all the success in your career. Born Lucky is really hope for parents, for every parent of a kid who is having a hard time.
Yeah,
And I think so many parents, and what I've learned now in the past 3 weeks, as the book has gotten out there and been so humbled by it becoming a #4 New York Times bestseller, because so many parents feel alone and they also feel powerless. Born Lucky is proof, and I think this is what you're picking up on, that parents have an enormous amount of power and agency, and there's real hope that they can do so much for their kids to be more and to fulfill their full potential.
yeah. And then, so before we could dive into the story and stuff, I wanted to ask you from a writer's point of view, because when I write stuff, it takes me forever, and I have to constantly hit delete and start over. And I wanted to ask you, while you were writing this, how many drafts did you do? How many, like, did it give you anxiety? How was that process?
It was a really remarkable process. I never went to therapy
Okay.
as a kid. A lot of kids now these days have therapists and everything else. I never did. So I guess you could say if you read Born Lucky, you'll find that there were a lot of nights my dad was my therapist when he was sitting in my bedroom with me, and I was, taking out my frustrations of the isolation and the bullying and everything that had come to me those days, every day. But these are sort of the darkest, deepest, most personal memories of my life inside Born Lucky, and they're brutal, a number of them. I think, did I go through a lot of drafts? Yes. My co-writer Don Yeager and I worked together on so much of it. So it was a collaborative process of interviews, both with me and then with my parents and then with some friends, understanding kind of how we wanted to tell the story, and then going through it. So we went through a few drafts, and then got to a final manuscript. But I wouldn't say we hit delete a lot. I mean, there was a lot of polishing and kind of trying to pull out the rawest parts of the story,
Yeah.
because I think people needed to understand that what they're going through is sort of what I'm going through, and you couldn't sugarcoat it at all,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I went through. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about working with Don is that even as a journalist, um, you never see yourself as others see you, and trying to write a story that is about yourself without having somebody to kind of pull on more of the emotional strings and more of the emotional thoughts, um, and dive deeper would have been really hard. So I'm really grateful to Don for doing that, and grateful to Don for pushing me and us, me and my parents, to sort of tell those deeper stories.
Well, it's also like a big skill, just because, your journalism stuff too. And, you've interviewed a lot of people. So like I feel like when you're writing, you could be like in your mind, all right, well, we could crisp this up really fast because you're used to having deadlines.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of very late nights, right? There's a lot of nights that I would work until, at the time I was doing 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah.
So I would get home at 8:30, and I'd work until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning on the drafts and on the chapters and trying to really pull this stuff out. So sure, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work. I've found that writing a book is hard, and then promoting a book and talking about it is even harder. Going to
Really?
therapy on national television is not exactly um, a bucket of Skittles, but it is a lot. I think I've been so overwhelmed, and that's really the right word, by the interest, even, from people like yourself to just families emailing and writing and putting stuff on Instagram and Twitter of just how much this is meant to them.
Yeah, and like one of the things that this is also very unique is because this is the book where you're telling everyone about your autism diagnosis, and like maybe I'm wrong on this, but this is kind of something you've never really talked about until the book.
That's a great point. And no, one of the things that my dad was very insistent on is that we not tell anyone. And he didn't even tell me until I was in my mid 20s.
Yeah,
So, I'm 6 or 7 years old, and in Born Lucky, the teacher, maybe principal, says to my parents that Lucky needs to be evaluated, right? Which is the worst thing any parent can hear. So my parents take me to one of those little medical testing centers. We've all been there, right? It's like, the linoleum floors and the bad coffee and old magazines and everything else. And they're sitting there for a couple of hours, and in walks this woman with me after all the testing. And she says, "Look, there's a lot going on with your kid."
yeah,
And she said it's very hard to understand what's happening inside his brain. And she says, his behavioral issues are terrible. So forget birthday parties or play dates or anything like that. If somebody touches him, if a kid touches him or he doesn't like something, turns around and slugs the kid. Um, and I was a fat little kid, so I could do some damage. Then there was the fact that I had bad sensory issues, classic autism kind of issue of I had socks that I didn't like or a jacket I didn't like or whatever, I would melt down.
yeah,
And she said Andy has these huge learning issues. So an IQ test is the average of two scores. A 20-point spread between the two scores is a learning disability. I had a 70-point spread. So that was the biggest spread they had ever seen. And she said to my parents, um, really, there's not much you can do here. You just kind of have to meet him where he's at. And my dad said, is there anything we can do? And she says, generally not.
yeah,
So you can imagine what that did to my parents. So Born Lucky is trying to give parents the hope that my parents didn't have, right? And you said we've never talked about this before as a family. We never have. And when we started writing the book, is I would be interviewing my dad or something, he would tell a story. Maybe it was the story of the principal who called my parents in seventh grade, and she looks at my parents 2 weeks into class. I'd just been pulled out of, I think, 3 schools during elementary school. So it's now seventh grade. My parents are hoping for a new start. And she looks at them right in the beginning of the school year and she says, everybody at this school thinks your son's really weird. And frankly, I do too. So think about the arrows through my parents' heart.
right,
So I would be talking to my dad about this story, and he'd say, "Well, do we really want to tell this story in the book? Do we really, is it's going to be so personal, and you really want that out there, and on and on?" And I said, we can't adjudicate every story. What we're going to have to do is we're going to write the book. I'll finish the manuscript. I'm going to give it to you, Dad, and if you don't like it, I won't turn it in. Which, to be fair, I didn't have a plan because I had a book contract, but no plan if he said no, because I had to turn something in. But
right.
there you go.
Hoping he said yes.
Hoping he said yeah. Um, so anyway, I give him the book at the end to let him read. And he reads the book and he goes, gee, I don't know about this. I said, let me turn this around for you. If when that woman in that medical office building who basically said, good luck, there's not much hope, instead had handed you this book,
Hmm.
what would you have done? And he said, I would have read it every week. So that to me is why talking about this now is so important.
Yeah, and then like also like, when I mean you're a little older than me, and so like I can only imagine the diagnosis process, and like I guess what I'm trying to say is in the past they weren't very educated about autism, and stuff. So like it's kind of like that where now people are more educated.
Yeah, look, when I was diagnosed, it was sort of before there was this idea of a spectrum, right? So they had all these names for different things that we now know to be autism. there was never, I never went to therapy. I never had outside help. I never had extra time on tests. I never had any of the accommodations that are offered to kids today. And that idea was from my parents was, especially my dad was, we're going to try to adapt Lucky to the world rather than the world to Lucky.
Yeah.
That was just his philosophy.
Yeah. And then speaking of Lucky, for the folks at home that don't know, that is your nickname
Mhm.
because you have an amazing story of why that's your nickname.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Born Lucky because when I was born, I was very lucky to be alive.
Yeah.
So my mom's about 35 years old. It's a very high risk pregnancy. It's her first pregnancy, 1982. To be 35 is a very, old time to be pregnant. So the doctor says to my mother, I have a bad feeling about this. I think you should have a C-section. A lot of literature at the time that doctors were having C-sections just because it was easier and easier to schedule, and having a natural birth was quite in vogue, and on and on and on. So my mom says, if I'm not going to take my doctor's advice, I should get a new doctor, not take his advice. That advice would later save me in the Middle East a few times. But I ended up with being born in a hospital with a C-section. So, they're in the operating room, my mom and dad and the doctors and everything else. And my dad is behind the sort of blue curtain holding my mom's hand.
Yeah.
And as I'm being delivered, the nurse goes, wow, this is a lucky baby. And the doctor goes, oh my God, a very lucky baby. And the nurse goes, God. So at that point, right, my mom's hand just like clenches down on my dad's. And she's going, what is wrong? And my dad kind of looks around the blue curtain, is like, Doc, everything okay? Like, and the doctor at the time goes, yeah, we're fine. We're fine. Just give us a minute. And then the nurse goes, this is the luckiest baby ever. So what had happened was is the umbilical cord was tied in two knots and around my neck. So had I been born
Uh,
naturally, I would have been dead.
or cerebral palsy or something, right?
Yeah, terrible cerebral palsy. Um, more likely dead, but either one, it would have been awful.
Yeah.
So my parents, go up to the hospital room and whatever else, and the next day the doctor comes to the hospital room where my mom was and where I was, and there was like a little board outside the hospital room, a whiteboard that said like, Carol Vittert, my mom's name, Leland Vittert, my name, and then, like the last time I pooped and ate and whatever else they needed to know. So the doctor crosses out Leland and writes in Sharpie, call this kid Lucky
Wow.
or call him Lucky. So that was that. Up until I was 18, I would introduce myself as Lucky Vittert.
Yeah. So, maybe, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but how come you've never like used Lucky when you're on the news and you're doing journalists?
Easy answer. So up until I went to college, I introduced myself as Lucky Vittert.
Uh-huh.
Hi, I'm like, I mean, to anybody I would stay, put my hand out to. And people would occasionally say, well, is that your real name? And I'd say, no, my real name's Leland, call me Lucky. But when I went to college, it was right when Facebook was starting. So
Okay.
everyone would see you as Leland, like they could see on, it wasn't really, we didn't have Instagram or anything like that back in the dark ages, but Facebook was just starting. So,
Right.
your name was what your email address was, what was on your dorm, what was, all these things were sort of attached to your name. And if you're, if you're Richard, call me Keith, or if you're William, call me Bill, or whatever it is, those are really easy to
Yeah.
explain. But if you're Leland, call me Lucky, everybody goes, why Lucky? And I just didn't want to tell the story I just told you,
A
a
thousand
thousand
times.
times in a freshman year of college. So I just said, I'll just go by Leland. So
Yeah.
now I just go by Leland.
Yeah. And see, like, it would have been cool if you just like had like a lie story, be like, "Oh, I survived a shark attack or
I
something."
wasn't I wasn't that smart. Good
uh,
idea when I wasn't that smart.
Uh, well, you also in the story, you also talk about a few instances where you were bullied, and I feel like
Mhm.
these are very important issues because I got bullied a lot growing up, and then our stories are probably not exactly similar, but I feel like this is a topic that the world needs to know because I don't realize that they realize that they're bullying. You know what I mean?
Oh, I don't know, Keith. I think people realize what they're doing. I mean,
Really? Like
oh yeah,
back in that day, because like
sure.
I heard like it was legal that they could hit kids with a ruler or something, and now it's not. You know what I mean? Like it's
Oh
kind
well, I mean, I guess you're talking about like disciplinary stuff in
of,
school.
yeah.
I never had any teachers hit me. I had a teacher in front of all of the art class in eighth grade, look at me in front of the whole class and say, if my dog was as ugly as you, Vittert, I'd shave its ass and make it walk backwards.
Jesus.
That was eighth grade. In fifth grade, my dad came over to the little elementary school I was at. I think this was the second or third school I'd been at because of the problems I was having. And my dad gets up to the PE fields because he heard I was in PE. So he's sitting there and he's asking the PE teacher who he knew from another school's football program. Both my dad and this guy are big guys and very successful athletes. And said to this guy, how's Lucky doing? And Jim Hoots goes, he's doing all right. My dad says, well, is he doing any better? Anything? And Hoots goes, yeah, I think he's better this week. My dad goes, great, let's go see him. And the PE teacher goes, I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Why not? And he says, well, I had to put him with the girls. I've put him with the girls for the past month or so because he gets bullied too bad by the boys. So, no, I think people know exactly what they're doing. And when I was in fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, whatever grade, I would come home every night at about 4 in the afternoon from school. And my dad would always be there. And he would, in his words and my mom's words, sort of put me back together every night, from the bullying and the isolation and the hurt that I was going through. Oftentimes I'd be yelling at him. I would be sort of taking all of that emotion out on him. And um, he used to say to me, "Look, it gets better. Real life, middle school is not real life. High school is not real life. The currency of middle school and high school is different than what's going to happen in real life." The one thing he did not add is how good the training of middle school is for a Washington newsroom.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the same folks that you deal with here every day, and I think I don't know. I think I'm pretty well understanding of who they are.
Yeah. I was gonna say because like in the acting comedy industry, there's a lot of like high schoolness. I can only imagine Washington newsroom.
Probably about the same.
I would say more because it's Washington. You know what I mean? Like, but that's great training. And so like I was curious, like, because like when I was in school, the subjects I fascinated on was writing and stuff. Like, where did you like what was the subject that you were really, really good at that like you could just do?
I not really any.
Really?
No, I mean I could do math, sort of math and physics. I was all right at,
Yeah.
but certainly wasn't really talented at anything in school. Just was not my thing.
Yeah. School's not a lot of people's things. But the thing about also is like I have a feeling with your bond with your father that he might be on the spectrum as well because a lot of people on the spectrum they kind of bond like that with someone else who's kind of on the same page with them. And I was just wondering, is there any truth to that? Like, do you know if your father's also on the spectrum or?
It's a great question, Keith. I think when you read Born Lucky, you'll see that there are parts of his personality that probably are. And he and
Right,
I had some similar experiences in high school and college. One in particular, about us both trying to join fraternities and how that worked out. I'll let people read the book to see it in the parallels between his life and my life. I think it's fair to say that in today's parlance, I would have been far, far, far farther down the spectrum or up the spectrum or across it or whatever you want to say than he was.
right.
Um, but I think one of the reasons he was able to understand me so well and help me was because he experienced some of the same issues that I did. And so Born Lucky, I think is when we start it, we take you back to when he was in high school, when he was in college, after his dad died, and his sort of beginning to understand the social and emotional equation or fabric, if you will, that he would then teach to me and how he did that.
Yeah, and then one of the stories that I find very fascinating is like when you're talking and stuff, and he would tap on his watch to let you know, hey, you're kind of over talking or something like
Right.
that, which I think was a very smart way to help you learn that stuff.
Yeah, that was the beginning, right, Keith, of sort of teaching me social and emotional cues. So, when I was diagnosed and dad sort of realized what life was going to be like, he had um, a few things. One, he knew I wasn't going to be good at school. He knew I wasn't going to be good at sports. He knew I wasn't going to have friends. So he tried to figure out a way to give me some kind of self-confidence, self-esteem. It started with by doing push-ups,
Right.
and beginning to help teach me how hard work could yield good big results. The watch story, because I didn't have any friends, right? And I didn't get invited to any kind of play dates or anything like that. He would take me to lunch with his friends, and I was a pretty um, interested kid in things because my dad was my only friend. So I was kind of a mini me. And I would be really interested in politics, news, business, all these things. So when we would go to lunch with people, I would be fascinated by them. And I would just go and just start asking questions. So my dad would tap his watch. And let's say we were out to lunch with Keith, and I would start in on you of like, how do you book your shows? How do you write your jokes? How do you decide how much money you get from the door versus the bar, and all these things that I would be interested in. And my
Right.
dad would tap his watch, and then he would, which was my cue to stop talking, number one. But number two, it was to bookmark that moment, right? Because then later, when we would leave, as we were driving home, he'd say, okay, so when Keith was talking about how hard it is to be a comic and in trying to, have a job and then build his career, why did you think you wanted to ask him about his jokes? Well, I don't know,
Right.
Dad. I thought it was interesting. Well, what could you have asked that would have been what Keith was trying to talk about? You see what I'm saying? It was trying to teach and role play the fabric of how most people um, interact socially and emotionally and connect. And
Yeah.
that was a learned skill over time.
Yeah, that's like a great story that I feel, parents who have a child on the spectrum, they could read that and be like, okay, I could probably use this skill to try and help. And I think like that's actually a plus tip, you know what I mean?
Born Lucky isn't a how-to manual. It's not a
Right.
cure. It's not a prescription. It's just my story. And I've been asked a lot of times, Keith, about, well, what advice do you have? And I don't have advice. I think the best part of the book is my father's afterword, which is written to parents that are having a hard time or whose kid is having a hard time. And I think people are going to take from the book what they will. And if what I've shared is helpful to them and is able to give them some ideas and give them some hope, then it's worth it.
Now, I wanted to talk about your autism because like it seems like that's like, a lot of people, they say, "Oh, Leland, I didn't even know you were on the spectrum." Where like me, like, I've been researching, watching past interviews you do, like I could kind of tell without even reading, knowing about the book. And I don't know if it's just like a spectrum, power that we could do. But I wanted to ask, like, that must have been like a huge, great skill for your career because, you now talk to people for a living. You now, do your research, you know what I mean? Like it's a good power, superpower, you know?
I've been asked that. I don't really know anything different, right? I can't say this is a superpower because I don't know what it's like not to be me.
Right.
I just am me. Uh, I think you make the point that if somebody who is sort of either understanding as you are about autism or the spectrum, and then watches my interviews or watches me on TV, you can pick up cues. I've said to people who said, well, I never saw this. I didn't know this, and I said, well, you don't know me that well.
Right.
Um, I've gotten very good at hiding it, which has been a learned skill over time, or either you could say accommodate, hiding it, adapting to it, sort of interacting in a different way, whatever you want to call it. The part that I think is important for people to understand, and I think you'll understand this, but for people who are watching, is that it is a every day, every hour discipline. And at the end of Born Lucky, I compare having autism to being an alcoholic. You're never cured. This is something you have to work on every day to sort of
Yeah.
overcome the instincts that you have to guide those to be sort of the normal social and emotional interactions that the world recognizes, right? And I think about a couple of months ago, I was playing golf with my father-in-law, and we had a nice round. We were playing with this other older gentleman. We finished the round and we're late. So I'm now in the parking lot trying to pack my golf clubs into the travel bag because I got to ship my clubs out and we're late, and he's in, my father-in-law is inside, and I want to be ready before he gets out, and on and on and on. And I'm trying to stuff the clubs in. And as you know, Keith, one of the things that becomes very um, classical in kids on the spectrum or people on the spectrum is you you become very task oriented, right? You sort of
Yeah.
super focus on one task. So that's what I'm doing when I'm packing the golf clubs. And over walks the older man that we played golf with. And he's trying to talk to me. So he's standing above me and I'm down there packing the golf bag. And I totally ignored him. And he's trying to talk to me, hey, Leland. And I'm just completely ignoring him. And it was as if I was back being 8 years old again. My dad had
Yeah.
worked with me for decades. And I'm back being 8 years old again, just completely rude, totally oblivious in my own world. And even at the time, I sort of knew, Lucky, you really should stop for a second and just go say hello and just be polite. I couldn't help myself. And I tell that story because I then texted the guy. I got his number and texted him. And I said, I just want to apologize. I was so rude to you. It was unacceptable. I know better. I didn't follow up with, oh, and by the way, I have autism,
Right.
because my dad taught me that you can never use this, your diagnosis or anything else, as an excuse. And I think it's why he never told me about it for so long.
Yeah. And then another thing that I found fascinating about you is like when you were a kid, you used to fly in the air and stuff, like pilot stuff. And I was like,
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. And I was wondering, do you still do that like in your spare
I
time?
I don't fly anymore, Keith, and glad not to. It was something I did when I was a little boy. My dad wanted to give me things outside of school or sports that I could take pride in, that I could accomplish, that would be different and new. And I had seen on TV a kid who had flown across the country. And I said to my dad, I want to beat him. I don't know why that came into my mind when I was 6 years old. He had done it at 10. I was now six. Uh, and at 8, started to take flying lessons. I always thought it was about flying. My dad obviously was way ahead of me,
Yeah.
and realized that it was about personal responsibility and taking personal pride, and having me have to do more reading and more math and everything else to understand the ground school, and to try and teach personal responsibility and accountability, which is what it did, and gave me self-esteem and something else. So when I was 11, I flew from St. Louis to Paris. I had my flight instructor with me,
Wow.
and after other than that, after that, I really stopped flying.
Oh.
One of those things that you kind of have to do every day. I know there's people who do it as a hobby. I never wanted to, so that's just sort of where I'm at.
But at least that's an accomplishment because how many kids you know can fly from St. Louis to Paris? You know what I mean? Like,
Well, yeah, it was a thing.
yeah,
But it was a great experience. In Inborn Lucky, I think the most important part of the flying part for your viewers and for my readers is my relationship with Mr. Mick. So, Inborn Lucky, he and I are in the airplane together on one of our training flights. And, this is not a jet. This is barely a propeller plane. It's like a sewing machine with wings and a propeller. So tiny. I mean, if I'm here, he's here. Like
yeah,
this, trying to fly. So I would get really airsick all the time. And
really.
oh, yeah.
Oh,
So I would throw up all the time, and I would like projectile vomit over the dash, the cockpit and the instrument panel. So we landed one time and I was had been throwing up and I'm like laying on the ground, miserable and nauseous, and my dad's standing there and Mr. Mick's cleaning the plane up. My dad looks at Mick and he says, "You know, Stan, why don't you just tell Lucky that he can't do it, right? Maybe he'll grow out of the air sickness, maybe he'll get better, but this is just getting ridiculous." And Stan looked at my dad and said, if he won't quit, meaning if I won't quit, if he won't quit, I can't."
Yeah.
And that to me was really an instructive moment, both as a little boy and still now I remember it at 43, that there's almost nothing that does not yield to hard work. And it is just such an important point, and it was something my dad taught me for so long, just never ever quit. And that is a huge part of Born Lucky, is just not quitting. So
Yeah.
I think that was really the more important lessons from flying.
No, but like not quitting is like that's like I'm the same way. I mean, with comedy and stuff, like my best friend who I toured with, he passed away in 2021. So I haven't made any real money in, 4 years, but I'm still doing it. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's like when he died, I could have just quit like that, been like, there's no point to it. But there's
Yep.
no, you know what I mean? Leland, I have three more questions. I want to respect your time
Sure.
though.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
I? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask you now that you're an adult and stuff, I know you're married now, you're a handsome fella. Like, is it easier for you now to make friends and like how was dating for you? Like, was it like tough for you? Like, how did it like impact you?
Well, again, it's very hard to answer that because I don't know what it would be like to date not who I am, right?
Yeah,
Um, I waited for a long time to get married. I met my wife when I was 38, doing the math. So I'd never been married before,
yeah,
nor had she. So we both waited a long time. I'm still very much a homebody. I don't have a lot of friends. I have a few,
yeah,
but they're typically people who I think are probably more understanding emotionally. It really wasn't until I was in my mid 20s that I even had a friend my own age. Um, Even then, I really didn't. So, I mean, probably in my mid 30s that I had a friend my own age. So I don't have a lot,
yeah,
but I certainly am grateful for the ones that I do, and really, I think that's been one of the best things. Well, actually, many great things about meeting Rachel, but she and I are really our best friends. I always say that my dad was for a long time my only friend and my best friend. He still is my best friend, but I think Rachel would be right there as co-best friend. So
yeah.
spending time with her is what I enjoy the most. And between work and the book and travel and everything else, it's there's not a lot of time for much else.
But I'm still the third best friend, right?
There you go.
Okay, as long as I'm still third, that's all I care about. So Leland, I wanted to ask you, this is kind of like a funny, goofy question. If you were an ice cream flavor, like a Ben and Jerry's ice cream flavor, what would you call yourself and what kind of ice cream would you be?
You know, there's not a lot that leaves me speechless,
Yeah,
but I have no idea. I have not considered that. I mean, I can tell you my favorite ice cream flavor from Ben and Jerry's is Cherry Garcia.
okay.
Um, but I don't know what I would be
Yeah.
as an ice cream flavor.
You could also name your ice cream flavor Born Lucky, right? And then like have like if you like
Well, if
marshmallows.
if Ben and Jerry's is wants to partner on something, I'm all in.
All right. And then my last question for you, Ling is if you could go into a time machine knowing everything you know now and
Yeah,
talk to a younger version of yourself and you only have 30 seconds, what would you tell yourself?
it gets better. Dad's right. Stay the course. I mean, it's interesting. I think that um, I know my 30 seconds are up, but the the whole point of Born Lucky, I think, is this idea that it does get better and giving people that hope. I mean, I really I wish I had had this book. I wish I could have seen someone going through what I went through and then see how it worked out, because I think it's so easy to look at people who are successful, whatever success I've enjoyed, and be like, oh, life was always so easy for them.
Yeah.
And then you realize it's not. And I think that message for people is really important.
Yeah, and I think that, your book just it shows hope and it shows hard work. You could still accomplish what you want to accomplish, and that's what I took out of this. And thank you for writing it, man.
Well, thank you for the interest, Keith, and thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, and then the last question: where can the folks at home follow and support you? Twitter,
Oh,
Instagram.
yeah, I'm sort of everywhere. Leland Vittert, there's not a lot of us. And then if they are interested in the book, it's bornlucky.com.
All
So
right.
you can get it there, get it on Amazon, and back in stock. So thank you.
Of course. All right, guys, that was the interview with Leland Vittert. Buy the book. It's a very big book. It'll change your mind. It will change your life. I first couple weeks I couldn't get it on Amazon, so like,
Yep.
that just
Well,
shows you.
we're back. We're back in stock now, so
Yeah.
it's there.
So that just shows you how great it is, guys. So follow Leland, support him, and subscribe, rate, review, and we'll see you guys next week on Reza Rifts.